This is Dr. Charles Parker, and you're listening to Core Brain Journal. It's a place where I connect both fresh discoveries and interesting different perspectives from advanced mind science with the realities of real people and everyday life down on Main Street. Well, welcome aboard, folks. This is Dr. Charles Parker one more time, and I'm telling you, I am so excited. This is a really fun interview. I mean, I have a lot of fun interviews, but this guy, Dr. Andy Farah, has been just one of the best of the people we've talked to because he's so engaging. Anybody who's listened to his 114 Core Brain Journal interview on Hemingway's brain will be changed for the rest of their lives about thinking about writers and suicide and not thinking about brain function when we should really have it on our mind. Thanks so much, Andy, for coming on board one more time.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was just such a joy last time. We're going to have another good time. So thank you.
Thank you. So I'm looking forward. I'm going to just drop a few words about our sponsors. Then we're going to come back and do a formal intro. Tonight, folks, we're going to be talking about something very interesting from a completely different perspective. One of the things that's really cool about Dr. Farah is he is over here on the writing side. He's a creator. He's an artist. He's a writer. And then he gets right down to biomedical happenings, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. So first of all, I want to remind you listeners that how much we already love the reality of data here at CBJ. And today we welcome our clinical friend and our new sponsor partner, Direct Health Access Laboratory. With over 3 million studies, they are deep leaders of experience with the big picture of measuring, just for example, methylation, cryptopyrrole, and copper challenges and how those guys affect brain function. They provide a global service with a molecular focus. Stay tuned for more mid-episode. And then we're also going to mention how much we appreciate detailed improvements of structured mind care. Today, we're pleased to welcome another new CBJ sponsor and partner with a deep interest in fresh options to address the complexity, get this, of adolescent treatment failure nationally and internationally. Barry Robinson Center is built TRICARE friendly. So they provide the holistic environment that sets children, teens, and families on the path to a different kind of more comprehensive healing. From a personal experience right here in beautiful downtown Norfolk, I know their work with families, and we have shared a number of folks with them, a truly different residential experience. More in a moment, we'll tell you more midterm. So let me tell you about Dr. Farah a little more. Those of you who haven't heard the Hemingway brain piece, Dr. Farah is a native of Charleston, South Carolina, and is now serves as chief of psychiatry at the High Point Division of UNC, University of North Carolina Healthcare. He is interested in discussing, get this, homocysteine theory of depression. He is an expert on some of the underlying principles that cause depression that are way out of range of just throwing meds at them. And he's for the use of reduced B vitamins. We'll find out what reduced B vitamins are in just a moment. For depression and for neuroprotection, get this, particularly the prevention of dementias. Yes, we're going to go deep here. So it'll be interesting to know that he has written this book called Hemingway's Brain, which I'm telling you is very, very well written. It's a very interesting book. That's the other episode. So, Andy, thank you so much for coming on again. Tell us a little bit about how you got into this deeply arcane study, which is so, in a way, non-traditional, and how that happened.
You're so kind. Thank you, Charles. Those are wonderful, kind words, and thank you for mentioning Hemingway's Brain. I think they meant the press mentioned there in the second printing, so that's delightful.
Oh,
so
good.
Thank you for your help.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. So, no, this has been a long journey. I remember when I was a resident and my attending said that, 7 out of 10 people respond to antidepressants. I remember going through my residency wondering, where in the world is that 70% of people? Because most of these patients are not getting better when I give them the antidepressants. I mean, they get some better, but they never get to remission. And my attending said, well, you're in an academic center. We get all the people that are not doing well. We get the most complex cases. When you get in the real world, you'll see 7 out of 10 people respond to antidepressants. So I got in the real world and said, where's that 7 out of 10 people? So I realized, that what we've been doing with the way we treat depression with medication, we've been blocking the reuptake of monoamines since, I don't care whether you have an SRI, SNRI, or TCA. Generally, standard of care is to block the reuptake of chemicals in short supply, and that thinking has not changed since 1957 and the synthesis of imipramine. So if somebody told you, you're getting a chemotherapy agent from the Eisenhower administration, you'd find a different chemotherapy, you'd find a different cancer doc. But yet every day people go to the psychiatrist and get kind of the same treatment they've been getting since the Eisenhower administration and don't think twice about it. And now finally, in the 90s, we finally started talking about, it took the late 90s, but finally started talking about, hey, maybe, just getting a reduction by 50% in a HAM-D score is not the way to say antidepressants work, but maybe looking for true remission. But I began wondering, well, why is it, that we're spending all our time blocking the reuptake of chemicals in short supply? Why is it those chemicals are in short supply to begin with? They're either in, serotonin is at a, low level, less than optimal level, let's say, for euthymia, and norepinephrine and so forth at baseline, or in response to stress, or both. And so I started looking at the genetic reasons that may be, and that, of course, led to the whole homocysteine theory of depression, which is a wonderful theory because it doesn't negate any other theory of depression. It actually unifies all of the theories. So it's kind of a unifying hypothesis, and it really does make sense clinically.
Sounds like Albert Einstein has arrived at psychopharmacology.
Oh my goodness. Well, you're talking about yourself now.
No, not me. The unified field theory of the universe. So, no, I'm interested in learning about this because over with Dr. Walsh, we're really interested over there with studying methylation and cryptopyrrole and copper and so on. What's going on over there, and homocysteine is relevant to all of that over there, just as I'm sure it's relevant to. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Now, you said a couple buzzwords for you and I get them, but people don't know what a TCA is. That's a tricyclic antidepressant. Imipramine, tofranil, all those.
Elavil, amitriptyline,
Yeah. And Pamelar. So the issue is, that was what we were using when I was a kid. Those were the group of medications that we were happy to have because people did get better on them. But let's get away from that old thing in the past. How does this whole homocysteine thing play itself out? Give us a foundation so we can begin to grasp what's going on there.
Sure. You're absolutely right. Gosh, we don't have to rattle off the limitations of the traditional antidepressant therapy. You have the sexual side effects, the weight gain that's possible, the withdrawal syndromes, and we've sort of leaped headfirst into this idea that it's just perfectly fine to give people, antipsychotics, even if they're not psychotic. It's just perfectly fine. In fact, there's certain antipsychotics, or 3 that come to mind, and of course, which they are, but the majority of people on them don't even have schizophrenia. They have depression, and yet, we find overwhelmingly these patients are not warned about metabolic syndrome, neuroleptic malignant syndrome, tardive dyskinesia, and so forth. So again, we're trying to coax that remission out. But you're right to start with homocysteine. I mean, it's an amino acid, and it's not a dietary amino acid. Homocysteine is really synthesized when we take in methionine, and the Western diet is very heavy in methionine. And so we've measured plasma homocysteine levels. In the research area, we can measure the homocysteine in the cerebrospinal fluid, and we kind of realize that they don't have to correlate. There's, you can have a normal homocysteine in the periphery, but not across the blood-brain barrier, which we'll talk about. But when we see elevated levels of homocysteine, first of all, you can be normal in the body, but high across the blood-brain barrier with homocysteine. If you're high in the body, you can pretty much guarantee you're going to be high across the blood-brain barrier. But when the levels are high, we see all sorts of neuropsychiatric, neurodevelopmental, and basically, neurological degenerative disease. So it correlates with dementia, with vascular dementia, with stroke, with depression, with schizophrenia. Schizophrenics have higher than normal homocysteine across the blood-brain barrier. Autism, repeated miscarriages. So anywhere you see issues of neurodevelopment, neuropsychiatric illness, or neurodegeneration, you see this elevation in homocysteine to levels that are toxic. Now, homocysteine itself is toxic to DNA. It actually pre-programs the DNA for early death. It's toxic to vessels. It causes endothelial damage, causes membrane damage. It's a source of inflammation, and it's a source of oxidative stress. So it's no wonder that patients with high homocysteine have strokes, right? It's no wonder it's a risk factor for that. So repeated miscarriages, women that have had repeated miscarriages often have high homocysteine and MTHFR polymorphism, which we'll talk about. You know, even homocysteine levels actually predict, like if you have a stroke, the patients who neurologically improve over the next 2 weeks and get to baseline versus the patients who decline neurologically and get worse or don't recover, it all depends on how high is it homocysteine at the time of stroke and during recovery.
Is that right? That is very interesting.
Yeah, it's a direct correlation. And PTSD, for example, somebody that has post-traumatic stress disorder, you can actually predict a favorable course or a deteriorating course based on the homocysteine level, which is amazing too. And we talked last time a lot about post-concussive syndrome. So the patients who have a concussion and develop post-concussive syndrome versus the patients who have a concussion and kind of do okay and kind of recover and don't have residual deficits. Again, homocysteine is going to be high in the group at risk. So obviously lowering homocysteine is good, but when we metabolize homocysteine, it's called basically the methylation cycle. But bottom line is the carbon 1 cycle. It's got various names, but when we break down homocysteine, 4 things happen. One is we get rid of its toxicity, right? It's a toxic chemical. The second thing that happens is that we make methyl donors, and methylation is such a key biological process that when we turn on and off DNA, we're using the methylation process to tell what genes to be expressed and what not to be expressed. So impaired homocysteine metabolism means impaired methylation and impairment in DNA expression, impairment in hormone signaling, things like that. The third thing that happens when we break down homocysteine is we're allowed to make monoamines, right? We have to methylate our monoamines, and some of the enzymes and coenzymes that are involved in the synthesis of norepinephrine, serotonin, dopamine, melatonin, there's sort of a lot of crossover between homocysteine breakdown and methyl donation making and the synthesis of monoamines.
Okay,
right?
I want to stop you right there, Andy. Let me
Mm-hmm.
interrupt you for just a second, because we're saying some things that are totally interesting to me, and I'm riding the train with you right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I know some people are listening to us. They're looking out the window, okay? And we really need to stay with this thing a little bit closer in terms of monoamine. What is a monoamine? And then the methylation process, how it turns off the DNA, because that's so doggone relevant, because that whole thing, understanding all that, is where the rubber meets the road if you are doing psychopharmacology on any level. So there's a place for the whole thing to work together correctly. So
you're absolutely right.
Let's start back and say, what is a monoamine? Let's talk about that.
Right. Monoamine, that's just basically, these are neurotransmitters: norepinephrine, serotonin, dopamine, melatonin.
The basic neurotransmitters.
The basic neurotransmitters, right, that we think are in short supply when somebody's depressed, right? Mm-hmm. And so for years, Prozac, Paxil, and Zoloft, they block the reuptake of monoamines, right? But they don't make your brain make more of them. In fact, the great paradox is, you'll meet the patient who says, well, I was on 20 of Prozac, it worked good for 6 months, and then it kind of quit working, so they doubled it to 40 milligrams, it worked good for 2 months, and it kind of quit work, and I got depressed again. So they gave me another 20 milligrams and it worked good for 2 weeks and it quit working. Well, what's happened is the Prozac itself has literally tricked the brain. It's blocking the reuptake of the serotonin. Yep. That floats back to the alpha-1 autoreceptor on that serotonin cell body and says, look, there's enough serotonin out here, you stop making it. So the Prozac itself tricks the brain into synthesizing and releasing less serotonin. And so you'll meet patients that say, well, I'm not particularly depressed anymore, but if I stop this Prozac, I sure get depressed. Well, exactly. Or it quits working on them, and that's been a term Prozac poop out. But basically, that's the idea. The monoamine is the serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine. We think these are in short supply in depression for this genetic reason. And
well, one of the things that we see, Andy, just to interrupt real quickly, is, and I call it Prozac stupid, because they get a cognitive deficit as well as the side effect that you're talking about, because Prozac actually builds up, it actually creates that decreased in neurotransmitter. And then what happens is you get a cognitive deficit as well. And what they
Right.
say after they've been on Prozac for a while, I can't find the bathroom. What was I talking about? I just said something.
Right.
And they have a
Absolutely.
cognitive. So sorry to interrupt you. I just thought I'd bring it. So you
No,
got a
you nailed it. You've
cognitive
got
and affective.
exactly. SRIs, as antidepressants, known to have short-term memory deficits and cognitive dulling, cognitive blunting. Where the patient says, "Well, I'm not depressed, but not happy either. I can't laugh or cry," and that it's a funny sort of side effect, if you want to even call it that, or maybe just an effect of having fluoxetine on board. Because when we have a teenager who's getting into fights and getting into trouble and having anger outbursts, what do? Put them on fluoxetine, because we want that emotional blunting, right? We want to lengthen the fuse and not make them so impulsive. So we're almost taking advantage of that side effect
That is
before
what
we
happens.
have to go to, yeah. And so you're absolutely right. Yeah. So I did go quite fast with that, but when we break down homocysteine, that's necessary. That's a necessary step to make the methyl donation, to make that serotonin, to make that norepinephrine. So the bottom line is, if somebody if they're not metabolizing homocysteine well, they're not making monoamines. And there's a lot of reasons genetically that somebody just can't make enough serotonin. And so if you look at a big map of all the, you go from tyrosine hydroxylase or tryptophan hydroxylase to serotonin, tyrosine hydroxylase, norepinephrine, dopamine, those enzymes and those coenzymes have to be functioning properly. And to get the methyl donation, to get rid of the homocysteine to have methyl donation, well, all those enzymes and coenzymes have to be functioning properly. So when people ask me, what's the genetic cause of depression, I say, it's kind of like the Enigma machine from World War II, right? The Enigma machine was this, there's this preset code that nobody knows, and you would punch in letters, and on the other side, another code comes out. And as long as you knew the code going in and the code coming out, you were okay. But for every message, the code was different. And that's the way it is with depression. Everybody in our waiting room comes to us with this unique cluster of genetic differences. And some are flat out mutations and some are minor polymorphisms, so that maybe an enzyme is a little less functional. Maybe it's 10% less functional, maybe 70% less, maybe 30% less functional, but it's less functional enough that now we have a problem with the functioning of the enzymes and the coenzymes necessary to break down homocysteine and make the methyl donation, and necessary to go from tryptophan or tyrosine to the end product monoamine. And so we don't know that exact cluster of genetic vulnerabilities that led that patient to us. But we know that, believe it or not, we can actually circumvent all of them if we use the reduced B vitamins, because whether we're breaking down homocysteine or making monoamines, our B vitamins are the coenzymes and they are the cofactors for those enzymatic steps. And if someone says, well, my B vitamins are fine, and my steps to metabolize my B vitamins are fine, my tyrosine hydroxylase is bad, my methionine synthase is bad. So it's not an issue with the coenzyme, it's an issue with the enzyme. How are you going to fix that? Well, what we've learned is you can actually coax normal activity out of the defective enzyme by giving supraoptimal levels of coenzyme. So enough enough helpers can make the thing move. So when a patient's sitting in our waiting room, okay, maybe they have MTHFR, which is a folate issue, which is very, very common in depression, and a B12 and a tyrosine hydroxylase. Or maybe they have methionine synthase and MTHFR. We don't know, because we only test for 1% of 1% that could be wrong. But what we know is we can circumvent it by giving all of the reduced B vitamins and all the micronutrients necessary for these cycles to go forward, for homocysteine
stop right there.
to get reduced. Right.
So that's great. So I'm sorry to interrupt you, because
No, you're good.
I'm riding with the audience here, and I'm thinking, the issue then is, let's talk about reduced B vitamins, because you've said that a couple of times, and people are thinking, give me an answer, Dr. Farah. This is an answer.
Right.
You're close to an answer here, but I still don't get it. So what are reduced B vitamins?
Well, most people don't realize that B vitamins come into the body as prodrugs. Our liver and other tissue actually break them down to the active coenzyme form, so that when you take in B12 or B9, which is folate, or B1, 2, or 3, these B vitamins in their raw form, for example, folate in nature is dihydrofolate. Well, it takes 4 enzymatic steps to break that down to L-methylfolate, which is the form the brain needs to make its monoamines and to break down homocysteine. So if any one of those enzymes is defective along the way, well, it doesn't matter what your vitamin intake is, you can't use it. You're taking in more and more of something that's not going to that you can't use. And that's why what was funny was a lot of the early literature, like 60s, 70s, early 80s, where they said, we're going to use B vitamins for depression or B vitamins for dementia. And they never worked. Well, of course it didn't work, because you're flooding the system with something that the body can't use. We realized later on that it was not, in the Western world, we have folate in the bread, for goodness sake. So it's not an issue of vitamin intake, but an issue of vitamin metabolism that is disallowing for adequate monoamine synthesis. So that's why the real clever thing to do is not to give more of something you can't metabolize, but give the fully reduced or fully metabolized form of B9 or folate, or B12, B1, B2, B3, because all of them are important. So again, you'll also see the scenario where they say, well, the doctor checked my blood level, my folate is fine, my B12 is fine. Great, well that's good news. But it doesn't mean the reduced folate and the methyl B12. It doesn't mean that L-methylfolate and methyl B12 are normal across the blood-brain barrier. In fact, there was a study in this year, actually, in the American Journal of Psychiatry. It was January's issue. It was called Neurometabolic Disorders, Potentially Treatable Abnormalities in Patients with Treatment-Refractory Depression and Suicidal Behavior. And they basically found that these people that don't respond to antidepressants, who have chronic suicidal thinking and behaviors and so forth, well, the majority of them, their folate was normal in the system, in their serum, but it wasn't normal in the brain, right, in the CSF. So again, they were lacking that coenzyme. And so we've mentioned folate and we've mentioned MTHFR, or methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase. This is the last enzymatic step, the last enzyme necessary to get to that coenzyme of L-methylfolate needed to make the serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine, and so forth. The problem is that it's defective in up to 76, depends on what study, you could say 76% of depressed individuals have one of the major polymorphisms of that, so they're just not able to make enough folate in the L-methylfolate form. And what you find too is if we just flood the system with L-methylfolate, well, some people get better, but some people get irritable, and it wasn't the answer we hoped for, simply because what we've learned is, well, we're testing for one polymorphism. What we found is the MTHFR presence is really a marker for multiple polymorphisms. And that's why I call it the Enigma machine. The patient in front of me, they may have a B12, a B9, and a tyrosine hydroxylase, or a methionine synthase and a cystathione beta synthase and a B3 or something. We don't know what that, we test for a small percentage of the enzymes and coenzymes that could be defective. But the good news is, if you give all of them, if you get B1, 2, 3, 6, 9, and 12, and all if you look at every coenzyme in that system and every coenzyme necessary to make those defective enzymes work, well, you can give that. You can give that in believe it or not, in a non-prescription form. So there are reduced B vitamins now that are $33 a month. And now patients that have come to me and said, well, I've tried all the antidepressants, they don't work for me. I say, I think I know why. The antidepressants, you have the genetic-based depression based in these polymorphisms, and we're going to circumvent every one of them with one or two of these reduced B vitamins a day.
So now,
now there's some,
sorry, I just wanted to catch it because I'm still riding with the public on this. And it's so interesting. Give us an idea of, you said $33. I mean, it sounds like you just go in and get them on Amazon, but how do you know which brand is pharmaceutically acceptable? One of the higher grade, how do you make that selection?
Well, there's a lot of brands of L-methylfolate, and again, when that first came out, over 10 years ago now, I mean, I was the #1 L-methylfolate writer in the country because it was prescription based. I thought finally somebody read my articles, right? And so now we can address MTHFR. The problem is that it didn't work for most people, and the reason it didn't work was, again, if all you do is address folate, well, you're catching that. It worked for some people, and there's some people that are still on it and doing great because they're that small percentage who only have MTHFR, but most patients have it in the presence of other polymorphisms. So the brands, basically the one company that said, look, we're going to circumvent all of them is JMAC, and they make Enlyte, Enlyte, Enlyte. Now there's three versions of Enlyte. There's Enlyte by itself, Enlyte, which is prescription form, and it has B1, 2, 3, 6, 9, has all the reduced B vitamins and all the micronutrients. And I did the pivotal trial for them where we took 330 folks who had depression with MTHFR, and half got placebo and half got Inlight. We got 42% remission, and 70% of the folks responded, but 42% of the group on the active drug got to full remission, which was great. Now, at the end of the study, we were able to double the dose and capture another chunk of people who were now remitters. And some of these patients are still around, and let's say 2 of them a day, there's some better, but then we would add a low dose antidepressant to it, and that's what kind of kicked them into gear. So you see the reversal here, the B vitamins as the base therapy, the antidepressant as the augmenter or adjunctive therapy, not the other way around.
Interesting.
So that was with basic good old-fashioned Inlight. Well, then they came up with Embrace HR, so ENBRACE-HR, which is essentially the same compound because it's a prenatal vitamin, right? So it's pretty much the same ingredients, but if you're going to give reduced folates, and it gives 3 forms of folate, because it's not enough, believe it or not, just to give L-methyl. The brain does need all forms of folate. It needs dihydrofolate, it needs tetrahydrofolate, and L-methylfolate. There's a folate pool in the brain. The vast majority of folate is being used for RNA and DNA transcription. It's not being used for this luxury of monoamine production. So it's nice to fill up the well before you take water out. So that's another beautiful thing about the Inlight, was they realized we've got to replenish the folate pool because these people have had this deficiency lifelong. And again, you'll meet patients say, I've never felt better. I recently I was in a state recently, went to a southeastern state to talk about, they hired me as sort of a consultant to the Medicaid board to say, what drugs should you have on our formulary, what shouldn't we have? And I started talking about the reduced B vitamins. And before I got back to the hotel, they were already calling the company. Some of the people on the panel, administrators on the panel, were trying to get some of these reduced B vitamins for themselves, which I thought was very nice that we were that convincing about the need. So there's the Embrace HR, which doubles as a prenatal, is being studied for depression in pregnancy, right? So the same chemicals used for maximal. Yeah, it makes sense, right? Because if you're going to reduce homocysteine, you reduce neurotoxicity, and you basically have optimal neuroprotection. We'll talk about neuroprotection in a bit. But then the third version, they discovered that a lot of patients were taking the B vitamins, but they're also taking vitamin D. Now, I'm not a big vitamin D researcher, and it's not my area, but I knew a lot of my patients were taking vitamin D. And so they made Inlight D, so ENLYTE-D. And this is the mail order form that is the $33 a month. I believe it's like around $30 a month. So this is your Inlight compound. They put on the vitamin D, and now anybody can get it without a prescription. So you'll find most people do fine with one a day. The beautiful thing about this too is you can use it in kids. Now, when a child or a teenager comes to you with depression, you talk to the patient and the parent, and you say, I just have to warn you, there's a chance of increased suicidal thinking if you're under age 24 on these antidepressants. Well, who wants that?
Yeah.
So they're more than happy to take something natural and safe. And I have a ongoing open label. I need to publish this pretty soon. I've got enough kids now to make it a worthwhile publication where you have the children and teenagers on this Inlight on reduced B vitamins for depression. And again, it has no increase in suicidal thinking. Now, it's not placebo controlled or anything like that. It's just an open label trial. But I can guarantee you these folks are doing so much better. They're so happy that they're not on an antidepressant with all the warnings we have with that. Oh, really? So those are the versions, and that is the best version.
Well, let me stop you right there because you mentioned children. Let me catch this real quickly before we go further.
Yeah.
Is the dose for the children different than it is for the adults?
Most people are going to do fine with once a day dosing. I think that in psychiatry, about 1/3 to 40% of my people go to 2 a day. In fact, if somebody's in the hospital, I'm mainly a hospitalist, they get 2 a day because, the severity of the pathology just generally argues for the presence of multiple polymorphisms. And we do spread out the dosing. Most vitamin absorption is transport dependent. Yeah, again, that study of the treatment-resistant depressed patients showed, their folate was normal in the serum, but there was cerebral folate deficiency was the most common thing we found in the presence of, low L-methylfolate. So again, they're getting it in their diet. They're just not able to optimally metabolize it, optimally get it across the blood-brain barrier and use it to make monoamines. And so
do you give it BID, or because nighttime supplement B vitamins frequently keep a person awake? How do you actually dose it?
As long as they're 2 to 3 hours apart, your absorption is going to be fine. So morning and lunch, no big deal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
and it's yeah, no problem. No, and it's just so funny. I mean, for years, you meet these people that just have had chronic depression, and they'll give you a list of antidepressants that don't work. And I realize, well, this is the genetic type of depression, and now we can finally address this, at its root cause. And again, I tell you, on another offshoot, there were some patients who came to the study and said, well, I have bipolar depression. I said, well, this really isn't about bipolar depression, but we know that antidepressants are bipolar. Well, they can be tricky, right? There's the data that says we can induce a mania. And then what gets indicated, you'll get the, most people with bipolar illness for depression, well, I'm sure they've tried Lamictal. Well, the problem with Lamictal, lamotrigine, is that it's just like methotrexate. It inhibits dihydrofolate reductase. So not many
I
people know
didn't
this.
know that. No.
Yes. So the people on Lamictal will say, well, it kind of worked for my mood, but the longer I'm on it, I just have this low energy, low motivation, low concentration. Of course you do, because the Lamictal itself is depleting folate in your brain, depleting your ability to metabolize folate. So if a patient says, I don't know if this Lamictal is working, I'm happy to stop it and put them on the reduced folates and Inlight and so forth. And if they say, well, it kind of helped me, keeps my mood kind of level, but I have this low energy, low motivation, low concentration, well, fine, we'll supplement you with the reduced B vitamins. It's amazing, lithium, the first generation anticonvulsants, of the second generation ones, Lamictal is the only one that's folate depleting. Women on high dose estrogens, right? So birth control pills inhibit the genes, the expression of the genes necessary to even absorb folate. So a lot of young ladies who say, when I take birth control, I get moody. Well, that's just estrogens messing with the brain. Imagine that. But the young lady says, well, I've been on my triphasal and now I just have this low energy, low motivation, low concentration. Yeah, she's gotten folate depleted because of that. There's so many agents out there that we just have to be mindful of that are folate depleting. But again, think of all the epilepsy patients on the anticonvulsants for years, and they just thought, well, I have low energy because I'm on Depakote or something. Well, it may not be the Depakote,
Well, no, let me catch you for just a second, because I'm enjoying
Yeah.
this conversation so much. I'm so lost in it. I got to take that moment for the sponsors here in the middle, and we'll just take a quick break, and you and I'll take a deep breath, and we'll come right back, because I've got a question that is going to be relevant for everybody here, and that is, I'm going to ask you about, after you do this, how do you measure it? What's the measuring tool that you start thinking about? How is homocysteine a marker, and what do you do? How does your doctor measure it? And then once you measure it, how do you stay on top of it over time? So we'll take a break right now, back in just a moment. Well, folks, you know as well as I do that psychiatric treatment failure, especially after multiple medication trials and those very, very brief hospitalizations, may prove insufficient to deal at home with the complexity of troubled children and those adolescents from 6 to 17 years old. Improved care, those next mandatory steps, should include a more comprehensive approach to address those multiple levels of challenges, from family to peers to school, diagnostically from defiance to depression, on every level for families, including military families internationally. The Barry Robinson Center's 32-acre open college-like campus in Norfolk, Virginia, provides safety and security and clean, comfortable living. How do we know? We refer folks over there all the time, strongly endorse what they're doing. So for further information, an informed interview, connect at this page, barryrobinson.org/core. Well, you folks already know that here at Core Brain Journal, we're on a mission to introduce you to resources that make significant contributions to the investigation of those predictable mind science applications. Our colleagues at DHA Lab Group provide a real difference with treatment options for people at every level, from first awareness of mind problems to those frustrating times when even well-informed treatment becomes surprisingly unpredictable. For my entire professional life, from psychoanalysis to brain scans, I've searched for, yes, improved predictability. The good news for all of us, from professionals to patients, remarkably effective research offers useful, cost-effective, organic options far beyond guesswork with psychiatric medications alone. DHA lab tests measure unbalanced biomedical details through easily available testing, now available globally for a variety of molecular answers from, for example, methylation, copper, and cryptopyrrole challenges. Check in for more details at dhalab.com core. That's dhalab.com /core. Thank you so much, Andy. Welcome back, folks. I mean, this is such an interesting conversation. It's hard to not get excited about something like this because it's transformational. I mean, it's just a real opportunity to listen to a guy like you talk about the reality of what's going on with brain function. And I'm going to have a lot of this stuff in the show notes because we're still talking fast and there's a lot of material here, but I'm really looking forward to putting this in the show notes with the links. So the question that we want to get back to is, let's take it quickly for the man on the street. Okay, what should the doctor measure? How, if they don't do a mouth swab with whatever GeneSight or whatever,
Right.
Genomind, if they don't do a mouth swab and look at MTHFR polymorphisms, polymorphism, folks, means a genetic variation in the way the genetic structure is with these different enzymes and metabolic pathways. So if they don't do the mouth swab because they're not there yet, how do they measure it easily, and then how do they track it?
Oh, it's a great question. In fact, this is going to surprise you. Outside the research setting, I don't bother to check, and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you because, first of all, we always check. Right, you're not going to stick a needle in somebody's bag. So the serum homocysteine is defined as normal if it's below 15 micromoles per liter. So if you're moderately elevated, you're 15 to 30 micromoles. And if you're intermediate, you're 30 to 100. If you're severe, you're over 100. That's usually very pathological. But 5 to 15 is going to be thought to be normal as far as serum homocysteine. Okay, so that's our starting point. Now, we know from our studies that you can have a normal homocysteine in the periphery but still be high across the blood-brain barrier. So I always tell people, just because they're in your waiting room, well, their homocysteine's probably because they have some neuropsychiatric disease, including depression, or they have some neurodegenerative disease, dementia, stroke, so forth, it's probably high across the blood-brain barrier. And then when we test for MTHFR and these polymorphisms, when we send off the typical MTHFR screen is for A to C, right? C to T. These are, 2 of the 40 different polymorphisms. So we're testing for 2 of the most common, but it may come back normal, and the patient still could have MTHFR. So I tell people the reality is, because they're in your waiting room, there probably is an elevated. The other question that comes up is, okay, do homocysteine levels in the periphery reflect across the blood-brain barrier? You say they don't have to correlate. Well, in general, if you're high in the periphery, you can bet that there's with a 10% variance, it's going to be high across the blood-brain barrier. But even the real question is, we don't measure intracellular. We measure we're measuring basically serum levels and trying to extrapolate not only CSF, but what's going on inside that brain cell, which of course nobody can ever know. So for all those vagaries, I say, hey, don't bother to check. Now, at the same time, in our study, well, we checked homocysteine, right? And we found that it did correlate, that when we were able to lower, when patients responded, in general, the homocysteine dropped by 30%. So when you're getting the active compound and we're basically getting the active compound and responding in an antidepressant fashion to these reduced B vitamins, the homocysteine dropped by over a third. Now, there were some people that it just wouldn't drop. So they were even getting better with their depression, but peripherally that homocysteine was up. And heavy smokers, right? So smoking will increase homocysteine dramatically. Lipid-lowering agents. I mean, there's just a tremendous number of medications. I already mentioned, the first generation anticonvulsants and Lamictal, but also L-Dopa or isoniazid, methotrexate, theophylline, birth control pills, lithium, anything that will increase gastric pH. So there's just a glucophage. Any number of medications are associated with elevation of homocysteine in the periphery. So that's why our peripheral marker isn't really reliable. So long story short is, yes, I talk a lot about these markers in high homocysteine in the research setting. In the practical day-to-day setting, I'm so much happier to just try the agent, try the reduced B vitamins, because it's safer and often works just as well or better than an antidepressant, and it does no harm. Everything in our study was placebo rate, no weight gain, no sexual side effects, no suicidal thinking. So to me, it's easier to just go ahead and try that. I do like the GeneSight testing and ID genetics and all that, but I tell folks that the only thing in there that points to a treatment direction is, of course, MTHFR. It tells you what antidepressants you're going to metabolize well, but it doesn't tell you what you're going to respond to, which is certainly much more complex. In fact, you may metabolize venlafaxine very, very well, but you can still respond to it because it breaks down to desvenlafaxine, which is Prestige, right? So just because you metabolize something well doesn't mean you may or may not respond to it. So it may predict side effects and so forth, but so many of these agents, fluoxetine and norfluoxetine, I mean, a lot of these agents have active metabolites that we have to think about. So yes, I'm a fan of genetic testing, but I understand its limits, and I understand that I like this treatment anyway in the presence of any sort of, in the absence of the testing.
Well, that's interesting. So then the ultimate business for you is really a good clinical evaluation on the front end.
Yeah.
This person is treatment refractory and there's something wrong here. And we're going to take a look at the homocysteine, which is somewhat helpful, not absolute.
Right.
But you really, I think you're telling us, and I'm kind of reading between the lines here, that when a person just in a metaphoric way, I hate to say it, sounds so rude, but smells bad from the point of view, they have they're so rotten in Denmark, and it's been so long, you would be remiss if you didn't do this right off the hip, because you're not going to harm them, and the possibility of hitting the mark is very strong.
It's very high, exactly, because you don't know going in. You don't know what that enigma sheet. You don't know the cluster. You don't know that code they present with. The environment acts on it, and the outcome is this abnormal production of monoamines. At the same time, you can address every darn one of them. You can give every coenzyme and cofactor and every micronutrient necessary for optimal homocysteine reduction and optimal monoamine synthesis. And you're also, in glial cells, when you reduce homocysteine, you make antioxidants. So you decrease the oxidative stress, and you get rid of the toxicity of homocysteine itself. So again, that's where the neuroprotection kicks in. Is, why do brain cells die sooner than they should? If you take a cell out, put it in culture, divides, every cell has its own biological clock. It divides X number of times and then it dies. But in patients with dementia, those brain cells are dying too soon. They're dying way too soon. And why is that? Well, there's oxidative stress. There's free radical damage just from normal reactions. And finally, there's homocysteine programming that DNA for early cell death and damaging that DNA. So when we give these reduced B-vitamins, reduce the homocysteine, and we allow the brain for optimal antioxidant production from the glial cells. And guess what? Now we've subtracted out the two main sources of cell death. And that's why when a patient comes to me and says, look, my dad has Alzheimer's, my mom's had vascular dementia from multiple strokes. What can I do? I'm 50 years old. What can I do? I say, well, let's give you the right stuff, which is the Enlight, of course, to lower the homocysteine and reduce the oxidative stress, and then a good omega-3 because that shores up the membrane. And if they're really, really eager to do even more, then sometimes we'll throw on the N-acetylcysteine, NAC, which is just an antioxidant. It's just the most potent. It's the glutathione precursor. Now, in the glial cells, you're going to reduce homocysteine. You're going to use B6 for that, reduced B6, and you're going to make your glutathione and make antioxidants. But if you want to give more raw material to help that along, that's not a bad idea. So I've had colleagues of mine say, "Oh no, just giving adequate B6, just giving the Enlight is enough." And I've said, "Well, let's just throw on more antioxidants. Just it's not going to hurt them. Let's be on the safe side, And that's another.
So many people are so damaged. I mean,
right.
Why not just throw the farm at them if it's not going to be high cost, and
exactly,
it's just going to increase the possibility you're going to have a good outcome.
It's funny, I talk to people who organize their entire life about cardiac health and they go to the gym and they eat right, so their entire world is centered around keeping their heart healthy. But what are they doing for their brain? And there's a good bit of overlap there, but at the same time, there are things we can be doing to protect that brain going forward, and we need to give it certainly as much attention as the heart. One's no good without the other, right? So.
Well, this is really interesting, and the question for me, there are a couple of things that come up as we're closing here. You did send us a couple of links to some good PDFs that are going to be in the show notes, folks, on the topics. And you want to tell folks a little bit about the two PDFs. One, obviously, we're going to have the link to the Hemingway Brain episode, because that's going to be a lot of fun. And then you have the psychiatrist.com article with pages. What was that article about?
Well, there was the pivotal trial where, Dr. Meck and I took the 330 folks, 160 got placebo, 170 inline. Yeah, and that's where we got the 42% remission with this B vitamin. So it's called basic correlation of clinical response with homocysteine reduction during therapy with reduced B vitamins in patients with depression who have these polymorphisms. But I want to emphasize, you don't have to have these polymorphisms. You don't even have to screen for these genetic variants in order to try the reduced B vitamins. It's just the safest, particularly if somebody's young, particularly under age 24. And then there was Psych Annals. I edited that issue in September of last year, and it was basically on the homocysteine theory of depression. And, there was an article called Theory into Practice, which we can link to, that talks about, okay, here's the homocysteine basis of depression. And, like I said, it's a unifying theory, and then, of course, the theory into practice, how do you treat it? When I say it's unifying, think about the people that say, well, depression is genetic. After years of looking into the serotonin, when I was a resident, you were a resident, they said, well, the genetic basis of depression is the SERT, the serotonin transporter. And that was the sexy explanation because all our drugs were like Prozac, but they worked at blocking the uptake of serotonin. Turns out after 13 years of research, that was a dead end. They said, well, yeah, there's stressful life events lead to depression, but the genetic variants that's being influenced there, it's not the serotonin transport. In fact, it's actually the presence of MTHFR and other polymorphisms, which we've been talking about. And so the genetic basis, this gets at the root cause of genetic basis of depression. The people that say, well, I think depression's impaired hormonal signaling. Well, fine, you have to have appropriate methylation for appropriate hormonal signaling, so it includes that theory. The people that write about the inflammatory response in depression have the old chicken and egg argument, does inflammation lead to depression or depression lead to inflammation? Well, sure enough, if you're not metabolizing homocysteine and making monoamines and making antioxidants, you can't handle the inflammatory response. So it doesn't matter which theory. And the epigenetics, of course, is all about epigenetics. They come in with this pre-existing code, and the environment acts on it and leads to the poor expression of certain genes to make monoamines. So I tell people, wherever your belief has been in what causes depression, this theory goes ahead and accounts for every one of them. And it's pretty much to me an airtight theory, and the proof is in the pudding. The pivotal trial and of course the childhood trial that's going on, open label. I did a whole teleconference one time, and the guy said, well, when are you going to write more articles? I thought, my goodness, I'm doing as much as I can.
Well, apropos of that point, I'm going to catch you right there because I do want to make sure, because while you're talking, I'm really enjoying listening to you, but I was looking for the reference. Please send me by email so I can include it in the show notes.
Absolutely.
The reference on the Psych Annals, because
absolutely.
I've read that a couple times, and that one looks terribly interesting. And I'd like to read it myself, of course, but then I think there are a number of people listening who are like, hey, let me see if I can reference that article and get into it. It'd be very good.
Outstanding. I'd be delighted. Yeah, and I just can't thank you enough for your interest. And I think medicine is like that battleship, and battleships turn slowly. And for years we've had the marketing and the research on the blocking of reuptake of monoamines, and every new drug. Some of the newer ones, they're kind of acting like, agonists, antagonists at certain postsynaptic receptors, and that's a little fancier. But none of them make your brain make more of the chemicals in short supply, and that's why 3 out of 10 people get better, and 7 out of 10 people just simply don't get better. And so this is a real new way of thinking about it. And again, I think the battleships do turn slowly, and I think if there were advertisements on the evening news about this vitamin therapy, we would certainly see, have patients come in asking for it. But instead, there are advertisements for antipsychotics, and patients come in asking for antipsychotics, and I give them the routine risk benefit side effects that talk about all the possible things that can go wrong, like NMS and metabolic syndrome and movement disorders. And they say, well, I don't want to take that. And I say, well, okay, here's something that's safer,
Well, it's this
easier.
weird thing. We're living in a strange world, and we do have to wind up in a strange world of managed care is also in a conspiracy, oddly enough. And I don't really think it's a conspiracy, but it has that quality with the medications, pharmaceutical companies, and managed care has taken it upon themselves to correct the pharmaceutical companies to make sure the pharmaceuticals companies get it. And the managed care companies are so doggone far away from human beings in care. It's like we got several levels of stratification away from reality. We've gone from dreams to like dreams to the 10 power, and we've got high school girls telling us what to do, or with managed care tell us, you can't do that. That's not
right.
It's like,
It's truly insane. There's no other business. The plumber doesn't come out here and have to call somebody else to ask what tools he needs to use, and get approval to use those tools. He has a job to do, to let the guy do his job.
yeah.
And so you're absolutely right. And a lot of times you kind of scratch and say, well, what do you need me for? If you're going to tell me what I have to prescribe and what I have to change to next and what, and obviously you realize, well, we're here to take the liability when things go wrong. And you have a third party that assumes all of the authority, but no responsibility. I mean, it's a very troubling situation, and we've all had our numerous frustrations with that. And you're absolutely right, talking my language with that.
The new responsibility, Andy, as you've said so articulately, so well, responsibility is to realities, to face reality. I mean, you mentioned belief. I was going to take issue with you a little bit on theory, because I mean, the word theory then gets a little over in belief. And I think what's really nice about what you're talking about is you're getting closer and closer to actual molecular cellular physiology, to reality. And reality is what everybody should be supporting instead of dreams, fantasies, and maybes. I mean, it's just that way. That's what we're talking about.
Right. And, the whole idea, the epigenetics is sort of a buzzword now, but what it really does mean is that there are psychosocial stressors that interact with the genes, so we, very few people come to me, and I mean, some people do come and say, well, I've been depressed my whole life, can't explain it. But most people, it's the psychosocial stress that leads to the inadequate synthesis of monoamine. So there is a psychological component as well. So I think you're right. We have to tune in that we are human beings and that we do have a transcendent nature, and we do respond to the psychological in a biological way, but we also have to tune into the soul as well.
You do. What a way to close, Andy. You did it again, buddy. I mean, you're talking the truth. Fantastic.
I love it.
And it's so comprehensive. Well, it's really great. We do have to wind up, but listen, give us a website that you would like us to go to, and we'll close on that. Really appreciate it.
Oh, you're a star. Yeah, EnlightRx, ENLYTRX.com. In full disclosure, I did do their pivotal trial, so I did get a grant, a very, very small grant to help with that, to help write that trial up. So, but that is there are some podcasts there. There's some educational stuff about. That's the main source for your reduced B vitamins, and that's the one. There's really nothing else like it. There's a lot of L-methyls out there, but nobody has just said let's include all of the possible polymorphs, circumvent every possible genetic variant that can lead to. So ENLYTERX.com would be your source for that. And I'll get you the other links. And of course, thank you again for mentioning Hemingway's brain. It's been very fun to lecture about that. And I'll tell you, hopefully you can join me in Paris next year. That's where the Hemingway conference is.
We'd have coffee right there on the Champs-Élysées.
Let's do it. But we'll head there.
Let's do it. Thank you so much, buddy.
Thank you.
You have a good one. Thanks for listening to Core Brain Journal. We're working every day behind the scenes to bring you reports that connect research benches with those street trenches. Here we share the complexity of mind science because, as you know, details really do matter. One of the most pervasive, misunderstood challenges is how commonplace medications, like those written for ADHD, are used so regularly without clear guidelines. If you think you'd like more specifics, take a minute to download my 2-page PDF packed with video links and references on the absolute essentials of how to start ADHD medications. They're easily available at corebrainjournal.com/start. Thanks for listening. Do connect and stay tuned. Together we can make a difference.